Hi, this is Andrew. I wanted to really quick put up a video talking about a product announcement that Fantasy Flight Games made this last week. In case you haven't already seen it, they've announced a new set for KeyForge called Age of Ascension. Pretty cool. They did their own video talking about it, and they interviewed Richard Garfield and went over many of the details. A lot of interesting stuff there. But I wanted to rehash it here in maybe a slightly condensed format. So here's the deal. There's a new set coming out for KeyForge. It's called Age of Ascension. Decks are going to work the same way. They have, each deck is going to be unique and have 3 houses and all that good stuff. There's a new starter set coming out. From a design perspective, here are what I thought were the really key takeaways from the video. So we have a new set, and one of the things that was encouraging to me is that Richard Garfield is still very involved in the development of this game. So he was on their stream. He was talking about how they made the set, and in fact, when they talked about how they made the set, Brad Andrews made the point that he made 3/4 of a set. Richard also designed 3/4 of a set, and then it was, according to Brad Andrews, it was Richard Garfield who then went and decided what things would stay in this set. So he's involved at least at that level. I don't know how much longer that relationship is going to go on, but Richard Garfield is still involved, and I think, I like Brad from what I've seen. I think he'll do fine. Even I think FFG will do fine with this game even once Richard Garfield moves on, but nice to see that he is still involved, and I'm sure FFG likes having that name power there. So Richard Garfield is still pretty heavily involved. This set is still going to have the same 7 houses that we had in Call of the Archons. Sanctum, Dis, Shadows, Untamed, Brobnar, Logos, and Mars. I think that's 7. And this will have the same 7 houses. I don't think they explicitly said that, but that they wouldn't, they didn't promise they wouldn't add an 8th house, but it sure sounded like it's going to be 7 houses. So same 7 houses, at least for now. There's no promise that they won't change that in the future, but that's the way it works now. There are some new mechanics. So they're already starting to expand the boundaries of what you can do in the game. That's very typical for this style of game, so no shocker there, but it was nice to see some new mechanics, which I'll cover in more detail in a minute. And then this was really interesting. They said that Age of Ascension is intended to be a companion to Call of the Archons, that it will go alongside it. It'll sell alongside it. Now, they didn't need to do that. And what I mean by that is, according to them, there's, I forget I'm going to misquote the exact number, something like 10.4 quadrillion, or it was a lot. The number of unique decks that can come out of their algorithm with just Call of the Archons is very, very high. So they don't need to do this in order to be able to keep printing decks. But they did design this to add some additional options, to add some variety, but it is designed to be a companion to Call of the Archons. It goes next to it. It's not, they explicitly said they don't think of it as a sequel or anything like that. And in line with that, it'll have 166 cards from Call of the Archons that'll still be in this set. So you'll see some repeat cards. They're changing out 204 of the cards, so the total number of cards will still be 370. They specified that out of the cards they're changing, a lot of those will be in the commons because they really wanted the decks to feel different, even though they'll have a lot of the same themes. You'll still get a house and say, aha, this is doing things I thought it would do, but they are changing out a lot of the commons so that when you get an Age of Ascension deck versus a Call of the Archons deck, it feels like, oh hey, this is an Age of Ascension deck. This isn't the same thing. I don't think they're changing out all the commons, but they are changing out a lot of them. and some uncommon and rares as well. Just one interesting thing I noticed about that number, if you were to say, split the number evenly among the 7 houses, you couldn't, I don't think you could end up at 204, right? So, so something interesting is going on there. Could you? 100. I'm not going to do the math right now. Anyway, I think it's kind of an interesting number. I don't know if that means that they're planning on keeping some of the odd sets of cards, like the Horseman or the Master of X or Time Traveler and Help from Future Self in there, or if some of those will be replaced by new variant or special cards. But anyway, just interesting. All bets are off. I mean, they could really do whatever they want, but my guess is they'll keep with the 16 common, 16 uncommon, 20 rare per house setup that they did in Call of the Archons, and then a few extra cards in the form of those specials and variants. But they could do whatever they want. There's no guarantee that they'll do anything. I mean, really, they have the whole world in front of them. One really interesting thing that they mentioned in this video was the concept of legacy cards. So this game already has what are called Mavericks, which are cards that show up in the wrong quote-unquote house. So, for example, you could end up with Anger in Sanctum. That would be a great example. Or Pit Lord in Sanctum. Pit Lord in anything other than this, which would make an even worse card. So, good and bad examples. But there are these Mavericks, cards that show up in the wrong quote-unquote house. Legacy cards are cards that are going to show up in the wrong set. So you get an Age of Ascension deck, and there's a very, very slight chance that you could end up with a card in there that that we would think of as exclusively Call of the Archons. All to say that exclusive is really a bad word to use there, because nothing is really truly exclusive. They didn't say anything. There was a thread somebody asked about this. They didn't say anything about whether they would sort of backport that idea of legacy into older sets. Like, for example, could you get Age of Ascension cards in Call of the Archons in the future? I doubt they'll do that, because it's probably logistically challenging, but they could. They certainly could do that. Someone was arguing, oh, they can't do that. It's done. But I don't know what indication we have that that's the case. I mean, it really seems to me like they could do it. If they wanted, it would probably just be some work. But since they're, as far as I know, they can kind of print these things in, as they go. Maybe try to keep a couple months ahead, but they can print these decks as they go. They really could change it if they want. So anyway, that's an interesting thought. But I'm excited about that. That means that we could be, let's say that we're all still playing this game in 10 years. We've all moved on. You could still get, a, I don't know, a Mantle of the Zealot or an Anger or something like that, even though that's not around anymore. I do think this suggests that they're going to stick with 7 houses for the foreseeable future, because it's really crazy to imagine how legacy cards are going to work if the houses are, if there's not even any of the same houses. But really, again, all bets are off. They're making this up. They can do whatever they want. So I'm really excited about that. I think it's very cool. And then I put this in design just because I think it signals something interesting about how FFG thinks about things. They've announced a new starter set, which I think is, I'll say it's better. It's strictly better. And I'll get into the details of that in a minute, but I'll just say I think this is them responding to the fans and what people want in a way that they haven't before with most of their games. If you were a Netrunner or Arkham Horror or I think Game of Thrones worked this way too, player, you buy a core set, you'd have to buy one or two or even three core sets in order to have a full play set of all the cards from the core set. That's a whole nother can of worms to dig into. I think they have reasons why they do it that way, and it's not all greed, but in this case, there weren't necessarily those reasons. I think they see that having a better starter set actually creates a better entry point for new players, and they did it. And anyway, I think that's pretty fantastic. Okay, now let's talk about logistics. These are just questions that I've seen people ask, or that I think people might ask about what this means or how to plan for this new set coming out. So they announced it's coming out in Q2. My cynical experience, having been a fan of FFG games for a while now, is Q2 probably means the very end of June. That's how these things tend to work, but you never know. We could be seeing it in April. I'd be thrilled if that was the case. But so theoretically, sometime in Q2. And importantly, it stays legal along with Call of the Archons. That's in keeping with it being a companion. They're both legal. You play them right along with each other. They're legal. I think they specifically said Call of the Archons would be legal forever, or as long as Age of Ascension was, or something like that. Richard Garfield seemed to indicate maybe that there are some thoughts about having decks just be legal forever, and have everything be balanced against each other. We'll see how that plays out if the game lasts 10 years, whether that's viable, but it's a cool goal. But I wouldn't take that as, written in stone. But at least for the foreseeable future, Call of the Archons and Age of Ascension are both going to be legal. Age of Ascension doesn't deprecate Call of the Archons in any way. I suspect at some point they're going to release a set where they say, okay, now for certain levels of organized play, you can only play with this set. I expect them to do that at some point, but they're definitely not doing it now. And it's designed to be balanced with Call of the Archons. So for whatever that's worth, they certainly tried to make it so that when you're playing one against the other, it's going to be as fair as playing within the same one. So now we have this world where everybody wants to play library access twice in the same turn. So not necessarily everything is fair or balanced, but that certainly was their intention. And there's a better starter, which if you have been thinking about getting into KeyForge and wanting a starter, I think this is going to be really good news for you. Although I would say, I think you're a lot better off grabbing pennies and nickels and using those as tokens and grabbing a deck and just starting now. If you're interested, that's what you should do. You should just start and use different colored pieces of paper if you have to for tokens. You don't need those special tokens, but anyway. But I think it's a really good move. And if you are waiting until you can get a quote unquote nice starter, then this is good news for you. Okay. All right, so let's talk about these new mechanics that they announced. I'm not going to go through all the cards that have been spoiled in this video, but I wanted to at least cover the 3 new mechanics. So the first one is called Alpha, and you can see an example card here. So an Alpha card is one that you have to play before doing anything else this step. Step is a technical term in KeyForge that refers to the different steps of play. So there's your choose a house step, there's your forge a key step. I might be getting those mixed up. There's your there's your normal play step, where you play cards out of your hand and use them. And then there's a ready step, an up. Do they call it upkeep? I forget. Clean up, something like that. But there's that step at the end where your card's ready and whatnot. Anyway, First Blood, you're almost certainly going to be playing cards like this in, that main step where you're doing all the work. So the point of this is you play this before you can use any cards. You play it before you can play any other cards out of your hand. And if you do anything else, then you can't play it after that. So I assume you can still discard it, but you can only play it if it's the first thing that you're doing. This, if they applied this to library access, all the problems with it would go away, I think. So that's an interesting mechanic. You sort of have to have it'll either be things where you have to have state already set up in order for it to be effective, or it might just be things that only make sense to do at the beginning of the turn, but they want to enforce that so that nothing weird and unforeseen happens. I don't know exactly how they're going to play it out, but I think that's how it's going to work. And then to match that is Omega, and makes sense. Omega, after you play something with Omega, you end that step. So what this effectively means is that after you play a card with Omega, you won't be able to play or use any other cards. And this is a great example, right? This creature, you play it, and it says your creature's interplay ready. That's very powerful. That's a very powerful effect to have all your creatures interplay ready. And but you're not going to be able to play this and then use it on the same turn that you take advantage of it on the same turn that you played it. Instead, you're going to have to have a plan to put it on the board and keep it on the board for a whole turn so that it's on your board when your next turn comes around, and then you can take advantage of it. So your opponent has a turn to react and try to deal with it. So I imagine that's how Omega cards are going to generally work. They're going to have effects that are really strong, and they want to force you to, to have your opponent have a chance to do something before you can take advantage of the card. So yeah, and pretty cool card there. And then this last new mechanic is called Deploy, and creatures with Deploy can interplay anywhere in the battle line. So you can, normally when you play a creature, it goes to your battle line, but it's going to go on either flank. It goes on either the far left or the far right of your battle line. But a creature with Deploy can go in the middle anywhere you like. So in this example, right, Lamindra gives her neighbors elusive. So it's really advantageous to be able to stick her next to some high value thing that you want to keep out, and maybe it's already on the board, so you just plop her right in the middle there. And Richard Garfield mentioned, there might be other ways where it's just interesting to manipulate the battle line, but all, or at least most of these creatures are going to have interesting effects that make you glad that you can kind of stick them in the middle if you want. You can still stick them on the end because it says anywhere in your battle line, but you can put them in the middle, like which you can't normally do. Okay, and then the last thing I want to cover here is that new starter and the details of it. So the previous starter had 2 unique decks, like this does, but it also had 2 learning decks, and those were the same in every starter box, and some of the cards were altered a little bit, and they were intended to give you, your introduction to KeyForge, conveniently leaving out Mars, and that was kind of cool, but I think, there just wasn't reason to have them after you learned the game. So I, for one, wasn't really excited about having to pay extra for that. I think the MSRP for that was $35, so it's essentially, $15 extra for those plus the tokens. It actually might have been all the way up to 40. Anyway, I just wasn't excited about paying extra for those, and I had tokens that I liked hanging around from my Netrunner days, so I've just been using those. But this leaves out those learning decks, and so it's cheaper. it comes in an MSRP of $24.95 technically, but about $25. And then the other really, I think, improvement from the original is the original had +1 power and stun cards, and not only that, but they were the same size as the normal cards. And yeah, that in my mind was just a really serious mistake. I don't know why they thought people would like that, but people by and large didn't. For promo items, they've had these little mini size cards for +1 power and stun, and that's been really nice. I like those. I still like tokens, but I like those cards too. They're small enough they don't totally cover up the card, so it's pretty nice. But I think tokens, especially for the plus power, are extra good. The stun, not a big, I think the cards are fine, but these tokens are nice too. So anyway, they've replaced those cards with tokens, which I think is an improvement. And then they also included these 2 poster playmats. I wouldn't use those. I think it's worth investing in a nice, a nice actual playmat that's gonna have some spring in it and give you a nice feel when you're moving cards around on it. But maybe some people will enjoy these. Anyway, so where I think the original starter was kind of a lot to pay. I don't know that it was necessarily overpriced for what was in it, but it was just a lot to pay, especially if you weren't interested in having those learning decks. You think, well, why would I buy that? But this, I think it's just fantastic. You get the 2 starter decks, and so I've seen this, on sale pre-order for as low as about $20. So you're basically buying 2 decks and you get the tokens thrown in. So that's pretty fantastic. If you've been waiting to get tokens, then here's your chance. I like the ones I have, so I still probably won't do this, but I'll at least think about it, because I think my kids might enjoy using those tokens. So maybe, it's not a bad idea. And everybody wants more decks. So anyway, so that's a summary of what they announced in their video. They then did some playthrough, and people, of course, were doing a fantastic job of just scraping images out of the video in order to get spoilers of as many cards as possible. So maybe I'll get together with a friend and talk through those at some point in the future. But this wraps up the meat of what was announced. So hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're getting out and forging some keys. Have a great day.